So you can have very fast back and forth, and there might be a lot of information exchanged, but maybe only 5% of it's actually worthwhile. And so
I don't think it's
how
exchange. So I think that's part of the problem is people have come to think that communications is, I send you something, I've done my job, that's communication. But that's not actually communication, because communication only happens when you receive it and understand it, and it's actionable. So me sending you 3,000 PDFs, through a transmittal isn't communication, because unless you've read those 3,000 PDFs or done something
the contract
with them,
says it is. The contract says
I'd argue a little bit against.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So, like, in the true sense of communication, where it's two-way, like there's a receiver and a transmitter, and
Right.
and that's where I think this bring it back to like talking about people and the objective of communication and what it's trying to achieve. Like, very few people are having those conversations. Like at the start of a project, people should be sitting down for a day in a workshop saying, right, what do we want to get? What do we want to do? And how can we collectively, because we're stuck in this project together for 2 years, how can we collectively make all our lives easier? But people don't do that. They come to a meeting for an hour, they rush off to their offices, and then they bombard each other with communications, but they're not really, they're just bombarding each other with.
It goes full circle back to sitting at the beginning and defining the terms, and kind of having a glossary of, this is what we mean when we say this word. And welcome everybody else. These are a great synopsis of our session there. So
and hopefully, Ralph, did you talk about pay it forward? Like you said you were going to? Because that might be our next topic is, what is the value of paying it forward from a data standpoint? But quickly go through new delegates, upcoming events, and our roundtable recaps. Scott has been on last few calls, but I don't think we've ever formally announced him. So I know Scott is here today. Had a great discussion, digital twin with Inertia Systems. So if you guys haven't checked out this idea of intelligent construction drawings, really cool stuff that Scott and team is working on. So welcome, Scott, to the team. Also, I don't think is with us today, but Alex Edgar with Holder Construction, Director of EDC, is with us as well. Those of you that don't know about Holder, they're definitely have made a name for themselves in the BIM and innovation world. So excited to have them on board. And if you missed earlier, again, we're excited to or honored to have so many supporters and everybody that is here making the time to push these conversations forward and advance the industry. So thank you to our supporters. But let's dive into our general session. So finding common ground, and Todd led this discussion where, again, I will let Todd, you dive into really whether or not you followed this, how might we or not. It sounded like it was a lively discussion. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about what happened?
We got through the first little bit of that statement. It was a great conversation, though. You heard actually a really good synopsis of it as everybody was coming back in there of what would it look like if we defined the terms of the project. So we're all speaking the same language, and we're not running into the translation problem that, I might use RFI in one way, but somebody else may be thinking of something different. So I think it was Jackson that had a really good illustration of that, of if somebody from Venezuela is speaking Spanish to somebody from Mexico, there's different colloquialisms and phrases that they're going to use. And somebody from the Venezuelan, might say something that is totally offensive to the Mexican, but
Asian versus New York. We got the same thing, right?
Yeah. So if we define that at the beginning, would that alleviate some of the problems, or would people even read those, that glossary, if you will? at the beginning. So it might not, depending on if they are engaged in it. But then we talked about the informal side of things, and Rob with his BIM and beer chat of how do you take the good nuggets that are in there and kind of formalize it out, and how do you get people engaged in a community like that, bringing it back to the people side. How do you kind of make that connection point? So there's a whole bunch of, it was a very lively chat the entire time. Bunch of information back, go back in and watch the recording when it comes up. There's a ton of good stuff there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Todd. And thank you, Ralph, for joining us finally. I covered your slides for you, don't worry. But no, thanks for being here. I do want to talk briefly. We did announce the dates earlier, February 8th through 10th for our second annual AEC Integration Summit. Again, if you're enjoying these conversations around this use of the CDX visualization to help us get on the same page, even though we may call it different words, but we're kind of understanding these key points of exchange, who are the stakeholders, and what are those pieces of data that are important. We will be going through this again in 2 days with a pre-summit networking day up at Vail. We have 6 topics now with 2 confirmed. So thank you, Sean McGuire and Mechanical Contractors Association. Certainly has a lot of interest in, again, looking at that package, whether it's a submittal package, whether it's a fabrication package, but the components of that and searching through project information by package. We also have Trimble confirmed on the by responsibility. So taking what has been successful with RFIs and submittals with using that ball in court designation and looking at potentially pay apps or other areas where we can expand upon that use of ball in court assignment to both produce future KPIs for the industry, as well as kind of rein in some of the standardizations, which is certainly what we talked about in the digital twin group. But you can see, plenty of different topics there around how do you search for project information. I have been reaching out to our ambassador level members and others, those that are on the technology or collaboration partner side that are interested in sponsoring, do reach out before those fill up. But those that are planning on just participating and want to make sure you get your kind of pick of the litter of those topics, we will be kind of on a first come, first serve basis for team signups. So the website is now working. I will put the link to the chat or link in the chat for those that are members to sign up. If you do and have already created your membership on the CPC website, and when you go and create your tickets, it should, and if it doesn't, ping me and we'll make sure it's right, but recognize the membership that you have, give you your appropriate discount, so that when you go in and buy your ticket, that discount does get applied. And then ultimately, a reminder as well for those that are going to go skiing with us and do already have an Epic ski pass and that don't need a ticket, use that code EPIC so you can get that maximum discount there on registration. So I will put that up in a second here, but before I do, let's hand over to the digital twin group. So I had a lively discussion, and thanks to those who were able to join it. Kelly, thank you for keeping everybody organized while I got our last stragglers on board to have this discussion. But I do think we actually made some good headway in validating a lot of these different efforts that have been happening around mapping kind of this metadata backbone as it relates to ISO 19650 and kind of decoupling that out into the different exchange activities that are happening with it. So without further ado, Kelly, what did you guys talk about?
You're right, Nathan. It all does tie into how do we classify information, because everything we're talking about here is passing things back and forth between folks. And if we don't have some set of standards or some way to transact the business, if you see in the title, lost in transaction, as Nathan mentioned earlier, that is intentional. How can you log a transaction if you don't have a common way of logging said transaction? That part of the code needs to be reasonably locked in so folks can communicate with each other. Once you start getting a little bit deeper, though, there's a lot more information involved around a piece of information that you're trying to share. A drawing set could be anything, really, right? There's all kinds of metadata that's associated with each one of those things. And we had John from BIM Launcher was our subject matter expert today, and we talked a lot about information containers and how an element, a container, could be a document, could be a package, whatever that container is. There's a way to define define that container, so that way you can essentially decouple it from any one particular system. You can, it's like passing a shoebox around to people, right? Everybody can put their hands on the box, and then there's some information about that. What's contained inside that box? Every box is going to be different. So certain things are static. There's a lot of things that are dynamic. And how do we correlate that? How do we create that framework on a project by project basis is really the consensus we kind of came to, because try to get a group of folks to agree about lunch. That doesn't work out so hot. So do we want to take and eat the whole elephant and try to create a standard that everybody in the United States is going to work off of? Not going to happen. But if we can take some small bites and agree with each other at a project level, these are static, these are dynamic, and there may be 10, 20, 100 more data points than the required that everybody in the United States is going to work off of. Not going to happen. But if we can take some small bites and agree with each other at a project level, these are static, these are dynamic, and there may be 10, 20, 100 more data points than the required, and different data points are important for different project stakeholders. We're going to capture everything, but you only have to see that's what's important to you, because that way you can optimize your operations, make sure you can keep up with the information. So encourage you to jump in and take a look at that video. It's a really good conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And so moving on, in sort of in a nice segue, I'm excited to put out our latest and greatest version of what is our version of formalizing common data exchange as this framework, this way of describing interoperability between different systems. And some of you may be familiar, Nuforma since 2019 has had this RFI integration on the Procore app marketplace that allows architects to receive RFIs and respond to them from the GC's Procore system without them having to actually be inside Procore. So sort of this best of both worlds. And again, from if you go on Nuforma's website and kind of the way that as a user of Nuforma, the benefit and the value prop makes perfect sense, that these 6 steps it takes in the traditional method is now boiled down into just 4 steps, and that is really the benefit. But I think those of us that are the technologists that know that there's something else going on, kind of have some questions and maybe more skeptical to the simplicity of this obvious value proposition. So that is really why CDX listed documentation and the certification levels that we're working on exist, is to communicate that level of detail. And so looking at this example here of the Rivet CDX connector between an RFI being written on the right side by the general contractor and then sent over to be notified by the architect on the left side. And so as we go through the different components of what exists here, again, apologize if you don't know some of these terms, but we'll share the link to the definitions and others. But this is representing a current state capability at the project level between those operations project management folks, representing the GC and the architect stakeholder, the system of record being Procore for the general contractor and Nuforma for the architect, and then the actual persona role being a project engineer asking that question and a project manager for the AE accepting that. There are 2 separate documents of record. There is the GC's RFI in blue and the architect's RFI in green. It's just actually passing the same information fields between 2 separate information containers or documents of record. And then the triggers that start and end this CDX activity begins with the submission button inside Procore of submitting that RFI that is then looked for through a webhook and brought over to into a push notification on the Nuforma side. So again, what's happening in between that is, again, creating a third-party immutable RFI log within the Rivet application that has its own system of record that in this case is owned by Nuforma, because that's how the relationship was built. Again, in a perfect world, we would all love to see an owner be an owner of a true common data environment in the center. But this is a really great example of just kind of showing how the business model has been made to work in this instance. So you can see how often that information is pulling, how long it takes. So we can compare that against how much time it would take in a traditional sense and start to get that ROI calculation. But ultimately that translation that we have been talking about in all of our different rooms more or less shows up here of, what are the user fields that a project engineer would be writing and capturing on the left side, what is ultimately being written on the Nuforma side, left side, and then written to Nuforma on the right side, and then how many of those things are actually being captured inside of Rivet, which as of right now is just a transaction date, but it gives us that opportunity to say, how many of these things should we be creating or capturing on an immutable sense and keeping that third-party record. So with that, re-looking at this workflow makes a little bit more sense of steps 1 through 8 of what's happening. And we can see that the direction of flow is going from right to left because the request of an RFI is essentially going backwards in the project delivery flow. The last things you see at the bottom are those screenshots of what you would be writing in a Procore RFI and what you'd be receiving inside Nuforma. And then in the middle here is our transaction metrics, which for those who like dashboards is fun. We can see that there have been to date now over 24,000 RFI transactions per month, and a total of just over 2,600 projects that have been installed across 305 Nuforma accounts. So congratulations, Nuforma Rivet, for putting that system together, and for Procore for having those open APIs and creating an environment that allows us to do that. So as seemingly small as it is, these are kind of the big stepping stones towards what we're all looking for. And I will in a second here put this PDF document up so that if you do want to look at it and dig in more detail, you can. But just real quickly on this, so what I just showed you was the CDX listed documentation that they had proven more than 5 accounts across an accumulation of 50 projects. That next level of CDX validated, it becomes more fun because as we see project site to eBuilder RFIs and other kind of RFI exchanges that are happening, we can start to gamify and have everyone kind of do an annual transaction submission report and see who's transacting the most RFIs or submittals between these systems. So excited to see where that goes. And then excited to one day have those organizations and ways for us to report at a higher level and get to that big data concept that we all dream of and have a CDX verified level. But for now, we'll just focus on those first 2. So with that, excited to dive in because actually in the digital twin conversation we ended up with, the struggle is all about motivation and why should we do this. So excited to hear what Satyam and Stacy and the group talked about with product data exchanges and how the sustainability world has been looking at solving that kind of motivational dilemma with getting good data and cleaning it up and getting good uses for it. So is Stacy still here?
I'm here.
I think, yeah, it's worth just, I know it's kind of short on time, but would because it's so relevant, would love to hear just a little bit of what you've been doing because I'm sure a lot of folks here don't know you and know what's going on. So let's just take the time to tell us a little bit about EC3 and what you've been doing.
Sure. Yeah. So EC3 is a free open access tool that I conceived of while I was at Skanska, trying to figure out how to access good carbon emissions data for products that was verified and in a standard format, and I couldn't find it. I found EPDs in terms of the verified data, but they were all PDF documents all over the internet. So I got a grant from Skanska to see if we could figure out a way to machine read those PDFs into a standard digital format that would be open and available through API to anyone that would want to access the data, and then build a user interface on top of it that would allow it to be compared, sorted, and then reported on at the project level. And so we did that. Microsoft was our first partner in terms of piloting the use of the data to make informed product decisions and then report their carbon emissions. And now the tool's managed by a nonprofit with the database being used and integrated with Procore, Autodesk products, Costex, and a host of others because it's there to be used in an open API. So we talked a lot about lessons that I'd learned through that process, but also the challenges when you try to scale something from a very specific kind of data that already has a standard reporting mechanism through ISO and EN and EPDs to all construction data. Where thinking about all of the fields, and I think Darren was vocal in that group. I'll call you out just in terms of when you think about construction data and every single component of what you are talking about there in submittals and RFIs and schedules and all the things. There are probably multiple definitions for each of those words depending on who you're talking to. So it's like you're coming up with an open construction data standard with the format and schema and boxes like you mentioned earlier. So it's scaling what we did with that little EPD project. That's not so little anymore in terms of the amount of data we have to many more things. And that common data structure is super important in terms of the schema. It can live in multiple places if that schema is agreed upon. We also talked about the example of safety, and if we're trying to get things to be standardized and to get people to report on it and be open and transparent about it, how did we do that with safety? And can we learn any lessons from the process of safety becoming something that everyone has to report on and comply with and share to other aspects of construction? And then that's just a big challenge to try to take an industry that's really kind of stuck in its ways and in the past and move it to a place where everyone's agreeing and sharing on a whole bunch of things. So.
Yeah, and I think it's like the whole something's got to give. And part of our discussion in Digital Twin as well was, do you clean you work on, or do you do the effort to clean the data before it comes into the system, or do you do it, before you have to share it out, or kind of these different points where you can clean it? And you mentioned, like taking PDFs and just having to do a bunch of machine reading on it. But I'm sure at some point there's still some cleanup that you have to do on top of that. And it's just, there's just so many layers of cleanup that I think we just underestimate the investment in. But if we do it in a way that can be shared at a broader level, then I think we can justify that effort. And it's almost like, how do we create a more industry level way of crowdsourcing data cleanliness? That's why these discussions are so interesting, because we move forward on it slowly each discussion. But no, I'm sure that this example of EC3 and how you were able to do it will provide some great examples for us to follow on with all these other efforts. So thank you, Stacy, for taking the time to share, and definitely those that are on the call that were not in that breakout, do check out that recording once we put it up on the YouTube channel. All right, so let's take her home. Pull up some slides here. All right, so upcoming events and activities. There is a construction dive, thank you, webinar that both Jan Rippengale and myself did, and those that are kind of hunting for more examples of kind of that success story. And if you haven't heard Jan's story of authorities having jurisdiction and how they're able to work with Solar Spec and the Orange Button Initiative and all these other kind of governmental activities to really leverage a win-win scenario for solar contractor installers, more at a residential level, but really interesting example to check out. I'll put that link in here in a second, as well as podcasts. So lots of podcast updates rolling out, and starting with Disjointed. I noticed Hugh Seaton, those of you that don't know him, has recently started The Link. So interesting to learn more about what's going on with that in that interview, as well as Amanda's conversation as well. And kind of this theme is, and Jeff, maybe if you want to point to this whole topic of risk and how important this is. It seems like there's a theme a lot across all of these, that risk is important and something that is not easily managed, but the more data we have, it seems like the better off we are. So great examples of that. But moving along, plenty of, again, contract crew episodes. Man, Jeff, you're busy. But I do know episode 329 with David John, it was an amazing discussion about machine learning and AI, and kind of, I got to challenge him a little bit on manufacturing versus construction and had a good kind of back and forth, as well as 330, Todd and Tim. We know them from IPI and all the EC events. But yeah, excited to see all these discussions going out. So check out those discussions on Contact Crew. Bridging the Gap. Again, Todd's been churning out a ton of great content. I think so much so that Caitlin Slocum's interview didn't even make the most recent cut. So I have to go back and find that link. Great conversation about storytelling and the power of marketing for construction. So all great topics here that you can check out, especially this, 35% of your day is wasted with Ron Nussbaum was a great episode that listened to on my run the other week. Second to last, Construction Dorks. We have Brett Stacks. He's been jumping around quite a bit, so good to kind of catch up with him and see what's going on there in that world. And then the EBFC show for those interested in learning more about lean and TAC planning and other items. Really, again, like the top two thought leaders within the lean world, I would say, is Philippe and Jason Schroeder. And so great to have them together and hear what they came up with in their discussions. One more highlight, just a kind of a fun tout for both CPC and NIBS. There's a recent Construction Dive article that is here. I'll throw it in the chat around this concept of cybersecurity and BIM collaboration. I mentioned it in our digital twin discussion, but it is really taking off. There is some weight, some energy behind solving these larger problems, mainly because of this larger threat of cybersecurity. So interesting to see that despite all our efforts, things are moving forward at that last position of public policy, and excited to keep moving forward with NIBS on those efforts. And as I'm looking at Jeffrey, I definitely want to figure out how to combine all these forces together with building smart and what everybody's doing, because there's definitely drumming up some excitement around what is a U.S. annexation of ISO 19650 look like, and who's involved in that. So it sounds like we're at least 1 degree of separation away from all the right people that need to be in that room. But until then, upcoming events, looking at the next couple months, we have Trimble Dimensions and Groundbreak, both that week of November 7th in Las Vegas and New Orleans, respectively. And then I will be down in Austin. So Jeff will have to grab a beer at Advancing IPD. So those of you that are interested in learning more about IPD or target value delivery, those sorts of terms, you can use the code CPC 10 to get a 10% discount on that registration. And be sure to let me know so I seek you out and we hang out when we're down there. Finally, again, all these recordings will be posted, and I've just gotten the last rounds posted up onto the YouTube channel. So subscribe there to get all these recordings or share them with colleagues that you think would get benefit from them. And we have not announced our December time for our next roundtable yet. It will be sometime either first or third week of December, but look for that invite for delegates and look for that to be posted to YouTube for those that are not getting those invites. James, any current updates or announcements you want to make while I'm looking at you?
Oh, I wish you would give me a little heads up on that.
I know. Well, it's
they have their safety.
You guys have an event or something coming up?
November.
Okay.
November is the safety summit. I believe it's also lean. That's also their awards or gala is in November, and then there are quite a few things. If you go to currentevents.org, it lists everything. The national conference is in February down in San Antonio, the same week as CPC.
Oh, you know what? Well, we have 1 minute. Jeffrey, did you attend? There was a BSI event like just last week.
Last week in Montreal, yes.
Anything worth noting?
All kinds of things, but too much time. 30 seconds.
For this group?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot more progress being made on the infrastructure side, obviously, and with the new tools that have been developed with the Building Smart Data Dictionary, the new IDS standard for describing exchange requirements. There's a lot there now. So
that's exciting. And the more, do let me know when those things come up, and we'll make sure we get those shared as well. And Ralph, you can check the recording and see how I did presenting your slides. Hopefully I did you justice. We'll follow up after. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
And I think finance managers, CFOs love that story.